much for joining in here today. I know we're getting a little cramped, so make sure to make room for the people that are coming in here at the end. Really enjoying being at ConnectTech back in person. Last year was all digital, so 2019 was the last time I got to see some of y'all's bright and smiling faces. So glad to be back here again this year. Today we're going to be talking about, well, what you can read on the screen, brick by brick, what Lego taught me about great APIs. And this stage up here is a little wobbly and I move a lot, so if I fall off, just as long as I'm still talking, we're good. Don't worry about me, I'll recover. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and start out with a story. So we're gonna backtrack just a little bit to December of this past year, December 2020. So a little bit about me. I'm the oldest of 4 siblings, and most of us have significant others. So when it comes to Christmas time, a long time ago we decided instead of each group like trying to get gifts for everybody, we would just do Secret Santa. And this would make everything a lot easier. So each of us just gets one person, and my mom helps coordinate everything, and it keeps things much more straightforward. And this past Christmas, my sister made the amazing choice of getting me a Lego set. This Lego set, and also this Lego set right here. It's great. I loved it. It was a fantastic gift. I played with Legos. Actually, you can't. I'll put this down here for people to look at. I played with Lego constantly as a kid. We had a big old Rubbermaid container. It was just packed to the brim with Legos. Spent tens of hours, hundreds of hours even, building all different kinds of whatever popped into my head. And I love Star Wars. I spent tens, if not hundreds of hours watching the movies and reading the books as a kid. And we honestly don't have enough time to go into all my love for Star Wars and for Lego, so we're gonna try to stay a little bit more focused and keep on moving. So I got this for Christmas, and a few days later I decided to go ahead and carve out some time to put it all together. We had a 1-year-old at the time, so carving out that time was a little more difficult, but I was able to make it work. So I was able to carve out some time in the afternoon, and of course, because nothing happens if we don't tweet about it, I tweeted about it and said, I'm so excited to put this thing together, and I really was. And so it took me a few hours, had to kind of work around my son's schedule, but it took a few hours, put it all together. It was great. I really enjoyed it. Got about halfway through, decided to tweet it again because I was so excited. It had been so long since I had worked with Lego, I mean, probably 15 years or more. I'd forgotten how much fun it was. And by the time I got to the end, this is the thing I'll put together. It now resides on the bookshelf next to my desk, guarding over the office. So if you're ever at my house, just know that you're safe. There is an ATST walker guarding, so we should be fine. So I put it together, and it was such a fantastic time. And there were so many things about the experience that honestly like brought me joy as I was going through it. I looked at my wife right afterwards, and I said, "There's a conference talk in here somewhere." And I said, I don't know what it is yet, but if I think about this long enough, I'm sure there's something I can pull out of here that would be a conference talk. And so that's what I did. I spent time thinking about what Lego did so well in this process, and I spent some time just kind of reflecting, and one day it just kind of hit me like a ton of Lego brick. Lego brick. For those of you who can't see the back, that's the dog made out of Lego bricks. So as I was reflecting on it, what I realized is there were a number of things that Lego did around the experience of putting together this kit that actually apply to how we build software and how we ship that software to our customers, specifically around APIs. So we're going to talk about that this afternoon rather. So a little bit more about me before we continue. So my name is Gesualdo, based here in the Atlanta area. Spent most of my life here. My wife and I have been married for 11 years, had our 11-year anniversary this past May. We have a 2-year-old son, and we have a daughter on the way in January, if all goes according to plan. So excited to meet her. I love anything with a solid narrative, so music, movies, TV shows, whatever. My wife and I are going back through and watching Doctor Who right now, which is a fantastic TV show if anyone's interested. Professionally, I've been doing web development for 7 years. I guess it's right there on the slide. Been doing it for 7 years, and I've been working in what I call web adjacent technologies for about, 16? I can't remember how long I've been doing this. Spent my first 9 years in the e-learning industry, so doing a lot of things that were web adjacent. and then 7 years ago moved over into actual software engineering and front-end engineering. During my time, I've done any number of different projects, worked on large-scale website rollouts, done work around build infrastructure, front-end enablement, design systems, more of your regular kind of product work. So done a lot of things in my time in my last 7 years and had a lot of great experiences. The last 3.5 years I've spent at SalesLoft. It's a company based here out of Atlanta. There I serve as a software architect, specifically in the front-end enablement space. So the way that software architects work at SalesLoft is that we are all embedded on teams, and we do many of the same tasks that software engineers do, but we also have the additional responsibility of maintaining a high-level, long-term technical vision for our surface areas. So as the software architect overseeing front-end enablement, my surface areas are twofold. One is in the design system, so we're taking what was historically a suite of kind of disparate components and bringing those together into a cohesive whole and actually wrapping them up in a true design system with all the documentation and the design tokens and everything that's involved there. The second area that I have purview over is working in our primary web application and handling the re-architecting as we're migrating off of AngularJS. So that's been a multi-year process, and that's where a lot of my thinking has been spent in the past 1.5 years. And in both of those situations, the idea of APIs and how customers interact with the code that we write has been very top of mind for me, because the team that I'm on, we are building code that a majority of the rest of the organization is using typically on a daily basis. And so there's a lot of responsibility there to build things well for our fellow teammates. So this was a topic that was bouncing around in my mind quite a bit, even before the Lego set came to fruition. But this was a great intersection of what happened here and what I was already doing at work. So let's go ahead and talk about APIs for a second. Want to level set on some definitions. So when I say APIs, I'm sure for many of us, the first thing that comes to mind are web APIs, where you can make a network request and receive some sort of data payload or affect some sort of change on the server. That is an API, but that's really only a subset of all the different kinds of APIs that are out there. So what I want us to do this afternoon is to broaden our definition of APIs to include that plus many other things. So everything from the Stripe-sized web APIs, right, where their customers are paying to use the API to do payment processing. It's a very API-first company, all the way down to, let's say you're building let's say you're working on the front end and you're working in your framework of choice and you're building some component that maybe a teammate's going to be using next week. The way that data flows in and flows out of that component is still an API. Obviously, it's on a much smaller scale, but it's still an API. And what we're going to be talking about today are principles that would apply to either of those and everything in between on the spectrum, right? You can think about maybe some of the things in between on the spectrum, things like design systems or UI kits. You can imagine things like open source libraries, Lodash, and things of that nature, all the way up to your Stripe type companies that are large API first, $1 billion, however much they're worth, I'm not sure. The other word that I want us to kind of keep in our minds, because I'm going to be using it a lot this afternoon, is the word customer. And when I say customer, I don't mean paying customer, although that may be the case. When I use the term customer, I'm talking about the person who's going to be using what we build. Like I said, that may be a paying customer, but it also may be the teammate sitting across from you or sitting through the Zoom looking at you. It could be you in 6 months. It could be members of the community if you're building an open source library. So customer here is a very generic term for anyone who's using the APIs that we build. So let's keep those two terms in mind as we're going through APIs, the code that we build, and what we expose for our customers to use. So let's go ahead and jump in. When looking at this Lego set, there were 5 things that popped out to me. And as we go through this, one thing to note is, as we're talking about APIs, it's helpful to think about our APIs as a product. And some of you may have experience working in product organizations at companies, maybe not, that's fine. But as we're thinking about the API as a product, again, we're thinking about it from a customer-centric perspective. What does the customer need? How is the customer going to interact with this? And that's going to inform some of these principles we talk about and inform how we work out some of these principles as well. So let's go ahead and jump into the first. And we're going to talk about documentation first. I will go ahead and caveat all of these. None of these are revolutionary, and none of these are going to, a majority of these have been written about in the past, and there are plenty of people that delve very deeply into some of these individually. So I encourage you to go and dig deeper into any of these that you find interesting. What I found helpful as I was thinking through this Lego set, and I was thinking through building great APIs, the Lego set helped me kind of have a launching point to think through these well, and I'm hoping that it will be a launching point for you to think through these well with me. So let's talk about documentation really quickly. This Lego set, the documentation is actually still in here, the physical instruction manual that came with it. And as I was going through the instruction manual, two things that popped out at me very quickly were how clear it was and how step-by-step it was, which makes sense for a Lego set, right? You're putting things together piece by piece. You're having to build things up and compose things into much larger wholes. So having that for a Lego set makes sense, but what does that mean in terms of APIs? Well, as we sit back and for Lego, they're kind of intertwined, clear and step-by-step. That makes sense. But for our APIs, I think we can actually delineate between those two a little bit more. First, clarity. I've gone through a number of open source documentation where they write it very much from their perspective, as someone who's familiar with the code, as someone who's familiar with the problem space, which is a natural thing to do, right? It's where they're writing from, it's their perspective. But it typically lacks a good bit of clarity for the person who's unfamiliar with the code or unfamiliar with the problem space. And again, there's a lot of writing already around how we write clear documentation. So a whole wealth of knowledge from people who are much more experienced than I am in that area, and I encourage you to dig deep into some of those resources. But what was very apparent to me as I was going through this was that clarity that I was having in this documentation for this set. If we could have that similar thing reflected in our documentation for our APIs, it's going to benefit our customer greatly. And the step-by-step aspect, there's typically in just about any documentation we write, it's like, hey, here's how to get started. Step 1, boom, do this. Step 2, boom, do this. And I've read quite a bit of documentation where you read step 1, you do step 1, then you read step 2, and you go to do step 2, and you realize that's not actually step 2, that's like step 4. But I don't know what step 2 and step 3 is in there because it's not documented. So being able to, again, step through our documentation as one who doesn't have the knowledge that we already have, and being able to provide clear step-by-step instructions to our customers is incredibly valuable to them. And that term value is going to be coming up a good bit as we continue through this presentation as well. We'll talk about that more as we go. Another aspect about the instruction manual here that I found really interesting was the fact that it was multimodal. And what I mean by that is there is the actual physical instruction manual in here, and that's what I use. I love physical books. I like being able to flip through the pages. I like to feel their weight. I like physical books. Don't really care for Kindles or e-readers or anything like that. So I use this. But they also have a mobile app that you can download onto your device of choice, and you can plug in the kit number, and then they have it all right there on the device. So if that's something that you'd prefer, if it provides some sort of affordance for you doing that on the mobile device, they have that as well. What does that look like in terms of APIs? I think it applies in terms of what are different ways for our customers to experience our documentation. So for instance, depending on the language that you're using and the editor that you're using, can you provide some level of inline documentation as the user is interacting with your library? They're actually typing it out. This is one of the reasons why in the JavaScript space, I'm a huge proponent of TypeScript and of documenting your TypeScript, is because it provides so much context around around the API that you're exposing to your customers. In fact, there was a few jobs ago, I had to do a little bit of C# work, and I was very unfamiliar with C#, but my typical workflow was to open up Visual Studio, to find what I needed to change, back it up to the period, and then figure out what the autocomplete was, hit the autocomplete button and see what was available to me. Because just about every line was documented, and I could go, I think that's kind of what I need. And I'd typically mess it up and have to go to talk to one of the C# developers, and they helped me out. But still, the fact that I was able to get all that autocomplete information and all that documentation in line was able to make me much more productive than without. I would have been completely lost without that autocomplete. So providing documentation where our customers are using the code is one way to be multimodal. Another one that I can think that I was thinking through was the ability to try out our APIs. And again, this looks different depending on what you're providing. If you're working on a design system, do you have a way for the users to kind of preview and maybe even do a live coding session of your components where they don't have to actually pull it down into a project and scaffold something out? If you're building something like the next Stripe, do you have the ability in your documentation portal for them to try out some of the different network requests and try those? So multimodal doesn't necessarily mean it's digital over here and then it's paper over here. It means what are the different ways that our customers can interact with the documentation that we have. And for APIs, that can mean portals, that can mean inline documentation. Another thing that's important to note here too is that depending on the size and the scale of the API that you're exposing, the level of effort that you've put into each of these principles will differ. The level of effort that Stripe puts into its documentation portal is going to look very different than the level of effort one might put into documenting a component that they're exposing for their teammate to use next week. The principles all apply, but the level of effort we put into it may change a little bit. So I'm not suggesting that for every component you have a documentation portal, but the documentation that we do have, is it clear? Is it well written? Are we making some attempts to make it multimodal so that users, or our customers rather, can experience it wherever they're at? And then lastly, the one that I thought was really interesting was what I termed as highly referential. And what I mean by that is, I know some of you in the back can't see it, so I'll just call it out. On this box, it gives the serial number for the kit. This is kit 75254. And if anyone was to go into Google right now and Google Lego 75254, you would find the product page for this with links to its documentation. And then let's see if I have it here. Yeah, we do. Again, I know you won't be able to see this, but trust me, it's here. On the back page of the manual, it lists out every single piece in the kit and the serial number for that piece. So if I was to lose a piece, or my dog was to chew through one, or what have you, maybe I just wanted to build a second one of these, so I wanted to buy all the pieces individually. I can go onto the Lego site, and using these ID numbers, I can go find all the pieces that I need. Now, how this applies to APIs, especially in web API documentation, I've seen many cases where there's a lack of good references. I'm not talking just about searchability, like having a search box in the top right-hand corner. That can help sometimes, but are customers able to get to the information they need quickly? Again, in Lego's case, I can Google that number with the word Lego and immediately get to where I need to go. Again, the API that you're building, it may not be quite as easily referenced. It may not have the first result on a Google page, but especially when the customer gets to where your documentation resides, how quickly can they get to the information that they need? Lego makes it incredibly easy, and so it actually makes it, it lowers that barrier of entry for me to take what they've already provided and do more with it. And that's what documentation really is about, is lowering that barrier of entry so that anyone can become proficient in what we're providing very quickly. It increases the value for them. And to a certain degree, it also makes our lives easier because it is another avenue for support that is on demand, that doesn't require a human to be answering questions in whatever chat application you use at the office. So for documentation, clear and step-by-step instructions, having it be multimodal, having means by which the customer can interact with it in different contexts, and then having it be highly referential so that customers can get to what they need quickly. So the second principle is, yes, composability. And when I use the term composability, especially if you've spent much time in the front-end framework space, it may mean different things to different people. So let's level set on a definition really quickly. When I say composability, what I simply mean is, how is this thing used in the context of something else? Or said a little differently, how do I reuse this elsewhere? So this is incredible, and let's go ahead and actually, we'll take a look at how Lego does this first, because this was actually really cool. As I was going through putting the Lego set together, this is one of the things that actually really fascinated me as I was going through, so I wanted to highlight it here. So I'll be pointing to the box, but I'll also have pictures up here for those in the back. So 3 examples from this set. So the first one, again, if you're not familiar with Star Wars, that's okay. This is an AT-ST Walker, an all-terrain scout transport from the Mandalorian TV show. It is technically the Raider version, for those of you that care about those sorts of things. It is a little more rough and tumble than the AT-ST Walkers in Return of the Jedi. And I only bring that up because this leg is a little more exposed. It's got some wires hanging off of it, a little more visceral. So these wires over here that are hanging off from the leg, you got 2 hanging off the leg, 1 hanging off the front. These are the same bullwhips that the Indiana Jones character uses. These aren't pipes. these are bullwhips that they just used elsewhere. The next one is up here on the top, the hatch on top of the AT-ST Walker. Those crossbars, those are lances. So if you got a little knight set and you had the little jouster on the horse, that's what they would have in their hand. And the last one, this one's really hard to see, but on the back, kind of underneath, or it's on top of that ledge in the back, it's meant to be the power source for the engines that are powering the legs. And instead of just using kind of a flat grill, they wanted to give some texture to it. And so the pieces that you clip down in there are actually paint rollers. And when I saw the paint rollers, I was like, what in the world is, like when I pulled them out of the bag, I was like, how am I going to use paint rollers on an ATS? This makes no sense. And then when I saw them in the documentation, I was like, oh, you guys are smart. And as I was thinking, I was like, wow, I have to imagine, I can't imagine that the person that came up with the design for the lances figured it was going to be on an AT-ST Walker one day, right? I mean, I think those lances the design for them is probably older than I am, to be honest. Those are some pretty old Lego. But what's interesting about how Lego works is that they've built up a system where pieces can be remixed, pieces can be reused to build all sorts of new and novel and interesting things that the original designers never anticipated. And they did this on purpose, right? Because I think many of us are familiar with the example of a customer taking something we built and then using it in a really hacky way that they shouldn't have, and you're like, oh, okay, I guess now I have to support that too. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the intentional step of building APIs in such a way that our customers can and do reuse them in interesting ways. Now, this is one of the principles that is highly context dependent. It matters if you're building a web API versus building a component library versus anything else. I can't give you exactly what composability looks like in your context. That's something you're going to have to explore for your API. But as we're thinking through our API design, as we're being intentional about what we provide to our customer, it's important for us to think through, how can I provide this to them in a way that they can reuse it well, that they can do things that maybe I'm not thinking of right now, but are still going to be of high value for the customer. So composability, again, this is one of the things that I love about Lego, is that you can take pieces and remix them in all sorts of interesting ways, and that's basically what I did as a kid. We didn't have money for like fancy sets. I got a whole bunch of things from like garage sales and just dumped them all into a tub and pulled out what I wanted to play with. So the ability to do this, the ability to compose this way, delivers significant value to customers because it means that they can use what you provide more frequently. They can use what you provide in more ways than perhaps just what you intended. Again, delivering more value than just what is there. So let's talk about consistency. And for Lego, I think the consistency aspect is pretty obvious. These specifications that you see on the screen, these are what every single Lego block shaped like that follows, period. And the heights for the flat pieces, every flat piece follows that height. The height for the full height block, every single one follows that height. It's not every single specification, but this is the basic specifications for all Lego. And they do this rigorously and consistently. And so what does this consistency mean? Well, it means that, and this feeds into composability. These things are all kind of linked. The more you do 1 or 2 or 3, the more it feeds into all of these happening together. Because they're consistent with their 2x2 or their X and Y axis grid, and because they're consistent with the size of the dots, and because they're consistent with the size of a hollow dot and the things like the lances and the diameters there, I'm able to use that. I'm able to compose with it, which again feeds into composability, but I'm able to also reuse it in, we can reuse it in ways that we hadn't expected, but I know that I can always come back to it, and that it's not going to just break on me all of a sudden. So one of the things about consistency that I think is so important in APIs is naming conventions, right? Let's talk about naming for a second. Especially if your API has, let's say, grown organically, right? The terms that we use to describe things, the terms themselves may have, let's use the word mutated a few times. And so I have been at companies where we use like the same 3 words to refer to the same, to like the one thing. And we do that internally and then we do that externally, which is not really helpful for someone coming into either a new, someone new to the organization, actually a developer there, or an external customer having to use some of the APIs that we built. Naming consistency is one of those things that we don't talk about a ton, but the fact that we have consistency in our naming helps our customers to pattern match. The human brain wants to pattern match. It's how we're built. And so when we provide APIs that don't follow a consistent pattern, we're forcing our customers to do more work to use what we're giving them. So let's take some more examples, right? So design systems. Are you, the data that flows in and out of your components that you're providing, is that consistent? The styling or styling overrides that you're allowing to happen, is that consistent? If you're building the next stripe, what are your status codes like? Your error messages, your data payloads? Can someone use 2 or 3 of the things from your API and then reliably guess how the rest of them work? Because that's actually a good thing. If someone can use 2 or 3 things from your API and then kind of squint and say, oh, I think I can basically guess how the rest of this works, that means you're being consistent. This is actually one of the reasons why I think jQuery was so, from a developer experience perspective, why jQuery was so powerful. You know, from the technical side, yes, it papered over a lot of the inconsistencies across browsers. But from the developer experience side, if you use 2 or 3 methods on jQuery, you basically knew how the rest of them worked from like an API perspective. Of course, they did different things, and you could interact with them with slightly different ways, but you had a basic understanding of how the entire rest of the library operated. So you could guess your way through doing an animation or hiding something or showing something or whatever it is that you might have had to do using Ajax. So reducing guesswork on the part of our customers is what we're going for. That's actually a good thing, and the consistency that we provide helps our customers to guess correctly, and that's a good thing. It helps them to pattern match. Related to consistency, very tightly tied to it, is compatibility. Now, does anyone know the year the first modern Lego block came out? When I say modern Lego block, I mean one that would actually fit on this set. Does anyone know the year? You just start shouting out years and I'll... 46 is a little too old. All right, there were way too many there. It was 1958. 1958 was the year that the first modern Lego block was cast, which means I can go back 62 years and find a Lego block and stick it on this set. To me, that is an incredible amount of backwards compatibility. Now, granted, technology moves differently than Lego, and I'm not suggesting that we're able to maintain compatibility with our APIs for 63 some odd years. But there are things that we can do. There are extra steps we can take around the way we build and the way we change our APIs that can increase the compatibility over time. Because again, we're focused on the customer. How do they experience this? We don't want to do things that just break their workflow for no reason. Now, there are times when we need to make backwards incompatible changes, and I'm hoping, however, the specific API that we're building is distributed, there's a way to version it as such. But on the whole, we want to provide high levels of compatibility with what we're building. And what does that do for our customer? It builds trust. So with consistency, we allow the customer to kind of pattern match on what we're building and have that positive ability to kind of guess what comes next. With compatibility, we build trust with them that what we're providing to them is not going to break their workflow, is not going to cause them pain, but it's actually going to help accelerate what they're trying to do. And this provides immense value over time. The longer someone uses an API that provides high degrees of compatibility, the more value they receive from that, because they're not having to relearn things, they're not having to go back and refactor code that was already working, they're not having to apply code module, or whatever it is that they have to do to kind of bring code up to speed. Again, there are times when we have to make backwards incompatible changes, and that's just a part of software development. How do we do that? How do we communicate it? And how do we make sure that the code that our customers are already using doesn't break? Which leads to the final point. And this final point undergirds all the other four, and that is empathy. And I think this is vitally important anytime we're building APIs. And this goes back to thinking about APIs as a product. When you have a product, it should be focused on the customer. And when you have a customer, you should be empathetic to how the customer is going to use what you provide. In Lego's case, it's pretty easy. They want to empathize with the customer, provide a joyous experience of building these Legos, whether you're a child, whether you're an adult. It also helps that they have licensing with just about every single product across the globe. So you have your Harry Potter, you have your Star Wars, you have whatever nerddom you're a part of, there's a Lego for that. So for them, they have a very clear image of what it looks like to have empathy for their customer. They want it to be a joyous experience. They want it to be something that you walk away from and go, I love that. I want to share that with my family. I want to share that with my son. I want to share that with whomever. As we're building our APIs, as we're thinking about them in terms of product, do we have the human on the other side of that product in mind? Are we thinking about how we deliver value to them? Are we thinking about how we allow them to pattern match? Are we thinking about how we provide value to them over time and we increase the value of what we provide to them over time? If it sounds like I'm just repeating the first 4 points, I kind of am. This is the foundation that the other four are built on. And even though it's last in this, I put it last instead of first because I want us to land here. I want us to end here. If you remember nothing else about this talk, I want it to be empathy. Documentation, composability, consistency, compatibility, these things are all important. I think if we follow those principles, we can build great APIs. But at the end of the day, what all four of those are based upon is our empathy for our customer and for their workflow, what they're able to do, how they're going to use what we provide. And I think if we keep these 5 in mind, no matter if we're building a single component to hand to a teammate or the next Stripe, we're going to build APIs for our customers that they're going to find value in, that they are going to want to use, and they are going to truly deliver value to them and their workflow. So thank you so much. I don't remember what time we get. I think we get out of here at 4:20, so we're just about on time. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for coming to Connect Tech, for all the speakers. I know we are so excited to have you here. Thank you for being a part of this event. Have a great rest of the day.